Hello there, friends. Welcome to another episode of our weekly Bible study podcast. Scott Wakefield, lead pastor at First Christian Church of Greene County, fccgreen.org, joined by
Bob and Tommy.
Bob and Tommy. It's a Bob and Tommy.
Tom and Bob. Bob and Tom. The Bob and Tom. Wasn't there a Bob and Tom in Indianapolis for 100 years that were comedians that were... Okay.
We're not comedians.
I'm pretty sure
don't know.
pretty sure I'm not making that up. WQRT?
We need to fact check that.
Yeah. I didn't agree to those fact check things. So.
You didn't agree. We didn't agree to that beforehand?
No, we didn't.
Well, that didn't make any difference anyway, so...
Here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are, talking about Exodus, week 52 of Exodus. We're in Exodus 28, and we're going all the way from 28, verse 1, through 29, verse 37.
We're going to be here a while.
So buckle up for a 3-hour podcast. A
3-hour
tour. I was going there as well.
Guys.
Nice. So hopefully we don't get lost on our 3-hour tour. It's not really that funny. I was trying to make a...
Do you have Can laughing?
Just trying to make a transition to the text. Lost as we talk about the text. So we're going to be talking about basically the formal institution of the priesthood. Not that priests didn't exist before this. We have evidence in Exodus of the priesthood in generic terms having already been happening in some form or fashion with the people. But this is the formal worship institution of the priesthood. And so there's a lot of stuff about what they wear, what they do, what animals they sacrifice, things like that. And we'll talk about those as we go. But our mixer today, this is not good.
I mean, I'm actually wondering which one you chose.
This is not good.
Yeah, I'm nervous about this. I don't know where we're going.
What's the coolest gemstone you've... There's a lot of stones in here, a lot of cool gemstones on the representing the people. So, and one of them is carnelian and points to the Revelation and the new heavens and earth.
Is sapphire a gemstone? I don't know anything.
I don't know nothing.
My Apple Watch is made out of sapphire glass, I think.
I'm pretty sure it is. How much time have we already? Okay, we've already...
I know. But as soon as you say gemstones, like I think to the elementary school,
yeah.
like where you go and you get a bag of dirt and you get the gemstones. Or you can sometimes, you used to be able to get them in the toy store and then you could
when you went to
sort through
Dollywood
it.
and
Yeah, but Dollywood, that's really what I think about with gemstones.
pan for gold.
Right. And I think probably to this day you can still see young children thinking they've just hit the jackpot.
Every
They
one of
find a
my
shiny
3 young
rock.
kids as we walked by that place in Dollywood, especially Alden. Alden was all about it. Little boys. I went through a little geology phase as a kid. And
I'm not surprised.
in elementary school. How come you guys didn't go through like a finding rocks phase? I had a box where
It's too dirty.
I'd
It was too...
put it in there and I'd label it.
I did. I don't know what they were called. Like that's the difference between you and me. Like I thought, oh, that one looks cool.
They were called-
You probably knew the words.
Things like onyx.
Didn't know that word when I was a kid.
No.
I was homeschooled, so...
Bob.
Topaz, carbuncle.
Carbuncle.
You got any rocks stories?
No, I mean, the only rock story that comes to mind is that I didn't know the difference between a promise ring and an engagement ring. And so, I mean...
Kelly
stone-
just put her
I
hand
believe
over
that
her
as well.
face right now in the room.
How come we're not surprised
She's
about
embarrassed.
that? Did he give you a promise ring when he asked you to marry him?
She's shaking her head yes.
You're lying. Really?
It's true. That thing
the
was so
best.
small. Like, it was this, like, you
That's
had to
the
get
best.
a magnifying
This
glass.
is definitely a story for later. This
We are.
is good.
We are
So
using
I
this.
later upgraded. Later we upgraded, and she actually got an engagement ring. So
Exodus.
It was a bling bling.
It's good. Exodus 28, starting at verse 1. Let's not read every single word, but let's just talk about what's going on and hit some highlights. of these, 5 sections? Yes, we'll talk about this in 5 sections. The first section is just the first 5 verses, where God initiates this priesthood to be a mediatorial, divine, human gap filler. I think that's the official title. There are hyphens there. It's a one hyphenated word.
Theological phrase.
So in 1 to 5, starting at 28:1, this is God talking. Bring near Aaron your brother and his sons with him from among the people of Israel to serve me as priests, Aaron and Aaron's sons. You shall make holy garments for Aaron, for glory and for beauty. And the skillful people whom I have filled with the spirit of skill will make fancy stuff to consecrate him for the priesthood. That's the first 5 verses. Paraphrased and
This is God talking
squeezed
to
together.
Moses
Yep.
still on the mountain.
Yeah.
And right after the section of the tabernacle has been completed, so what are the priests going to do within that?
Yeah.
So it's still all within that big section. So
Yep.
God giving these instructions to Moses.
Draw near, bring near is movement toward God language. And I think what we're saying here, more than anything, I mean, it talks about holy garments. That's going to take up a lot of space. Talk about being set apart because they're holy and they're consecrated for the priesthood. Skilled craftsmen, because the beauty of it indicates God's character and nature. But especially, more than anything, initiated by God. I think that's a huge thing to make sure we do not miss for the entire almost 2 chapters here.
Yep.
Anything?
I noticed too that it's also that family lineage that he's setting up. Several times he mentions Aaron, your brother, Aaron's sons, Aaron, your brother in verses 1, 2.
Yep.
Verse number 4 does the same thing. Aaron, your brother, and his sons to serve me as priests. So he's setting up this lineage of Aaron and his family.
Yep.
They are the ones that are going to do
The Aaronic
this.
priesthood. Yep.
Yep.
The people of Aaron. Cool. Alrighty. So first section, first 5 verses, God initiates a mediator through the priesthood between him and his people. The ephod, E-P-H-O-D. And we've named this section, Bearing the People Before God in Remembrance. This is verses 6 through 14. Ephod is basically an apron, kind of a looking thing.
Yeah.
In fact, you can see it right here. That's our cue.
That's
to-
good graphic work,
That's, yeah.
Scott.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It is skillfully worked and woven with blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, that phrase that speaks of it being the best stuff.
It's the same wording that's used for the tabernacle, right? The fine line, twin, interwoven connection there.
You mean with the veil and the,
Yeah.
yes. I'm not sure what those words were that he just said. But,
That was a good little run on there. You're doing.
I'm good at that.
but yes, it's used of the veil and how it's doubly woven. Yep.
This is the section with the gemstones on
It's
it.
got the stones.
Yeah, where we at least attempted to do our introduction with our mixer there.
Yes.
There's no engagement ring and promise ring
No,
going on
no.
here. This is
This is way fancier.
genuine.
So 12 stones. 12 tribes of Israel written on the 2 stones that represent the people. And they're here.
Well, these are on the shoulders.
Oh, the onyx stones, yes.
Yeah, and then on the chest is the
breastpiece.
12.
Yes. But the 2 onyx stones have the names of the 12 tribes
Yes.
on them. Yes.
Yeah.
as you can see here.
And so there's a lot of symbolism that would go into any of this with a type of clothing that's going to carry a message. And so we have the shoulders bearing, like pointing towards the strength.
Yeah,
of
Aaron
the
shall
man.
bear their names before the Lord on his two shoulders for remembrance.
Yeah, so we carry things. Less today. I use a dolly, but carrying things on your back or on your shoulders is definitely a common way upon which you would carry the weight of something. And so you've got that symbolized here.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see the gemstones then on the chest piece, which covering the heart.
That's the next.
Next. And
The
so there's
breast piece is 15 through 30. You shall make a breastpiece of judgment in skilled work. There shall be 12 stones with their names according to the names of the sons of Israel. They shall be like signets, each engraved with its name for the 12 tribes. And Aaron shall bear, similar language, the names of the sons of Israel in the breastpiece of judgment on his heart when he goes into the holy place to bring them to regular remembrance before the Lord. And he goes in to represent the people there, bearing the judgment of the people on his heart before the Lord regularly. You were saying?
Yeah, so all the stuff that the priest would wear is definitely not ordinary clothing. It definitely has meaning and symbolic nature. And you don't see that on a Sunday morning here. You see that some types of religious services. You'll see symbolic and special clothing. But just because you don't see it here doesn't mean we're not familiar with this sort of idea. As we would go into any type of store today, and you indicate often an employee by the type of clothing they wear. And so often it's a color of a shirt or the same type of dress. And so what does that mean? That means something in particular. So one of the things that we would look at and we would say, what's the deal with all this clothing? Is what are some of the meanings that we would gain from this? I think we talked a little bit about you're emphasizing there that Aaron is bearing this upon his shoulders and bringing this on his chest and his heart before God. And it's inscribed with the names of the tribes of the people. Mm-hmm. So the people are being brought before in representative form before God. So in other words, this points us back to the whole idea of the tabernacle, which is how is God to interact with his people? How is this to take place? So I think there's a lot of detail that goes on to this.
Yeah,
but
we've
zoom back,
not even really, we've just scratched the surface of the details of the things that are going on in the garments so far.
There's so many words about what this is, but the importance of it is, at least for me, it's important to remember. It helps to remember the importance of what's going on, which is that God is interacting with his people, and how that is to take place is what we're seeing, all of these details. But for me to remember really what that's about, God interacting with his people. Mm-hmm. And so what do we see because of that? That's
and he initiates that interaction. Ultimately.
And it's not clothing that Aaron had. He didn't make it himself. There was no way he was going to make it himself.
It was the skilled craftsman given the Spirit of God, which is indicative of more of that God initiation.
Yeah, there's a lot more that can be said about, which I don't know how much in the sermon, with the text this size, it's probably not possible to do a lot. But
we'll talk about what these little things mean. Like blue is the color there has probably to do with heaven, and
purple with the royalty, and so all of those things are going to carry with them some significance, which are interesting to study for sure, as they point towards what's the meaning behind what's going on.
Yep. There has to be a go-between. The priest has to bear the judgment.
That's what it's called, is the breastpiece of judgment that he's wearing, and it's repeated. And so they're being reminded of that every time when they would see the priest.
Yeah, and the judgment.
Regular remembrance.
They have to remember that he is bearing that judgment for them. That's the only way to come to God.
Do this in remembrance of me later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not talked about that because of their sin yet. That's later on, right?
Right, but
that's not in this section yet.
Not
That's
quite in that
on.
section, but it's a little, and and it gets, we'll talk about this now, I guess. It's progressively more involved in what it means to make the mediating thing happen. The Urim and Thummim, which we'll not really go into here, but we don't really know a whole lot about what it really was. It's like a casting lots kind of thing, maybe, that,
It could have been some coinage or some,
yeah,
not dice, but it's
it's like that.
it's like that.
And there could have been three possibilities for the answer, and it's a way of of getting God's will, all things being equal, supposedly, some people think. However, we don't really know. But I thought about that because one of the names for Urim and Thummim may mean cursed or perfect. Like we don't actually know what they believe. But I just think it's ironic, we're talking about judgment here.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's like, I had read something, it's also just a yes or a no.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's a yes or no for God's blessing, or his curse, I guess, is similar to what you were saying there. It's a way in which God would give his blessing or his curse, his yes or his no. Why would we not need that anymore?
There were two, and they're both the same, yes, no, and then they're different is a third one.
Well, yes.
Which
is why you talked about the coin. So if it's a white or a black stone.
Right.
Or, yeah.
And so there were three possibilities.
I mean, is it hearkening to the fact that, okay, there's no completed word. The Holy Spirit is only coming on those skilled people or certain individuals that God has chosen. Whereas today we have the completed word. We have the Holy Spirit guiding us. So this was just a form of which God was trying to communicate to his people. Is that what we have here, in a sense?
I don't think we know hardly anything about what the Urim and Thummim really are.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking, like in a life group, as people are coming together, we have to almost accept, and it's hard to, when there's things that aren't clear, and we don't have the answers.
Well, which is a lot of life.
It's okay.
Wisdom issues.
Yeah, it's okay to say we don't know, right? We don't. The whole life group time doesn't have to be spent discussing the Urim and Thummim, but we can actually say, hey, we don't know,
right?
And that's okay, and settle in that.
I just was bringing it up because
I think it's good that we brought it up.
One of the reasons may have to do with judgment, that they think it had something to do with that.
Deciding about.
Because we were getting to judgment eventually here.
Yeah.
Well, when Saul is being deposed as king, he receives no answer.
The Lord did not answer him by dreams or Urim or by prophets. 28:31 through 43, the end of chapter 28, is additional garments. Emphasizing holiness in a whole bunch of different aspects of priestly service. We talked about the ephod being made of blue, heavenly origin kind of idea. Pomegranates with golden bells on the hem.
We should have done pomegranate. Do you eat pomegranates? That should have been our mixer. Man.
Cut. Let's start over.
Start over.
Sorry, that was a random idea.
I've had pomegranates.
Actually, I've never had it. So.
No?
No.
Ooh, they're very exciting, actually. Yeah.
I've not done the scoop it out with a spoon thing before.
I have lived a very exciting life compared to the two of you.
You lived in California.
Clearly. So on the hem at the bottom, pomegranates with golden bells on them. Pomegranates and golden bells on the hem, which it says so the people could, hear the sound of their coming and going, basically. It's not exactly clear why they're making sounds.
There's a lot of assumptions, but we don't know.
Maybe so that that he's
still alive.
Still alive.
He goes into the Holy of Holies.
Is he spending too long in there? Oh, I hear him. He's coming back out.
Right.
There's something I think about the people hearing it That's supposed to be a going before the Lord to represent us, kind of a, oh, that's happening, kind of a thing. The tradition of tying a rope on his foot in case he died so you could pull him out is not Bible. It's just totally oral tradition.
Oh, really?
In fact, I don't think there's any Jewish writings at all that actually refer to it.
Yeah, because that's what I grew up in hearing, that
Yeah.
Mhm.
they got to pull them out. in case
It's not even in most of the comment. I don't even think it's in any of the Jewish commentary. Turban on the head, engraved with a plate. The plate that's engraved. It's on the front that says "Holy to the Lord."
We really don't know what the turban looked like. We have more description about the plate than we do the turban, and so.
Mhm.
But the emphasis there is that the name of the Lord is there.
Mhm.
But
More dedication to God.
right, so the emphasis is on God, and
Yeah.
not these external things like the turban.
Some of the thinking is it's on the forehead, and part of the putting of the guilt on the scapegoat is putting the guilt on the head,
Because they'd grab the horns and put their head on the horns. Is that right?
Hand on the head.
hand on the horns.
Yeah, okay.
But that's for the, yeah. So bearing the guilt from the holy things that the people of Israel consecrate is where the thing on the turban goes. It says, it shall be regularly on his forehead that they may be accepted before the Lord. It's, again, another thing that might point to something more. It's interesting how much we kind of know, but kind of don't. With things like this, Urim and Thummim.
And I'm assuming they knew, they understood these things, I guess.
Mhm.
But it just has somehow fallen through for us.
Well, the record
Some
of
of
the
it.
priesthood
Records.
has not been a strong record. I mean, that's
Right.
part of, I don't know what point we'd talk about that, but
Well,
the failure of the priesthood.
this is where I was headed.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
because
that's a good point about that.
right,
Their failure is,
it's more pointing to Jesus ultimately.
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
need for that. The perfect lamb, the perfect sacrifice, the
Mm-hmm.
perfect priest.
Yep. So we've got tunic, sash, undergarments. They're all significant because they do things like cover, shame, nakedness, at least representatively. Emphasizes modesty, emphasizes serving for the Lord in modesty. And so we've not even touched on quite all of the things, but we're not even to chapter 29 yet, but we've named what, like eight or nine, maybe, different items that the priest wore.
Mm-hmm.
And we were just talking about what he was wearing. That all pointed to needing a priest to do the work. Anything more about that one?
Yeah, I think it, pointing to the holiness of God, what does it mean to approach Him? What does that look like? The chasm between our sinfulness, and even as set apart as these men were as priests, all that was required for them is astonishing.
A ton.
Yeah, and that's really what chapter 29 begins to look at and say, how are they set apart, the sacrifices that are required, and as much, we may say, cleansing and
Washing, cleansing.
being made right that was going on. You still have these places where we were just talking about that with the rope around their leg, where they're like, we're going to get this wrong, we're going to mess this up, and there's still going to be a problem. And we know that the sacrificial system was full of just constant sacrifices and awareness of sin.
A lot of sacrifices.
Yeah, and
You talked about they would presumably be aware of some of those questions that we don't know about and everything else that we do. They would have been aware of all those things. They also would have been aware of what, it's going to sound a little bit morose, of course, but I think that's the point. They would have been aware of what a lot of blood looks and smells like,
Right.
and how much in the process of killing an animal, you're going to hear,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no forgiveness without the shedding of blood. There is no approaching God without a recognition of his holiness. And that is just constantly symbolized in what's going on. And yet, for the way that we think about, well, let me say, I won't even put this on other people. If I'm the one who gets to wear those fancy clothes, I'm going to so easily start to think so highly of myself. Look at me, look at what I get to wear, look at how I get to draw near, and there's this pride that's going to swell up within me. And as if there's something about these clothes that have made me right. And so I love the way, just pointing back to Scott, the way you started us with this is that it was really God's sovereign choice over his decision to say, I want to have a relationship with you, and this is the way that I'm going to do this. And even though we're going to go through all this work to have these men be prepared to do this, that ultimately it's just going to continue to point to your great need, which points towards Christ and his fulfillment of that, not just as the perfect priest, but as the perfect sacrifice himself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think, when you're talking about the amount of blood, the amount of things that went on and all this, that another thing that could definitely have crept into the priesthood, and that we see that as we study the history of the Jews, is just the rut that they got into. It's just there's the amount of blood, the amount of killing, the amount of this is what we do, let's bring it in, come on, slice, altar, it's like you could see that. And then later on, right now I'm reading in my personal reading is in Amos, and God says, I hate your sacrifices. Well, why? Because it was just a rut. It was just let's do it, let's get it over with. Okay, we did it. All right, go on. And God eventually, hundreds of years later,
As if the mechanism itself
right, yeah,
did something
right,
instead of pointing
the
to,
actual a relationship with God.
yeah,
And God would just say, I'm disgusted by all this.
yeah.
So we're getting way ahead in the history, but we can already see that it's very possible. The way it's set up and the way they did things, because they're
I
broken
can't
and human.
imagine day in and day out.
Yeah.
I was trying to see if it was in our section. It's the one right after that where
Yeah.
it talks about every day, a lamb in the morning, a lamb at night. I just can't even imagine living in that system. And then not just that you would have this sacrifice of these rams, but that you would then wave them both, up and down, and you would take certain parts of it for consumption, certain parts of it outside the camp. All of these things that you would do just surrounding all of this sacrificial system. I can't imagine living like that.
Right.
And for those things to not become overly routine in such a way that you begin to think wrongly about what it is that has brought you near. Is it my faithfulness to this routine that has brought me near, or is it the grace of God and his forgiving of sins, and seeing fit that when we place our hands upon this animal, that our guilt is then passed to that, and it takes that, so that then we can approach. It's so easy for me to see how I could fall into the rut. I just know I could.
I know I would.
And falling into a place where it becomes just ritual and routine.
Yeah.
And so that's why, and I know I sound like a broken record as I've said this, as we're reading through this passage, but remembering what it's all about is, for me, at the heart of it's got to be in the forefront of my mind. What is this all about? And why is God giving, I already forgot how many chapters, like 50 chapters or something crazy, about how much he talks about the tabernacle, and how many words are dedicated to setting up the right worship. It's important, but it's easy to get lost in that and forget the heart of God to have a relationship with his people.
Yeah.
We didn't make it through chapter 29, Scott.
We just did. That was it.
Oh, okay. I tried to at least touch on some of the things. It's such a long passage.
We didn't really talk a whole lot in depth about what the sacrifices are.
Yeah.
But in generic terms, there's a bunch of sacrificing that's going on, all of which are very complex rituals that involve the death of a substitute,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which means, as you all have talked about and implied, some required total dedication to even just remembering what to do and how to do it and in what order and for what, which by itself is a picture of the immensity of God's holiness compared to our sin and the immensity of our sin compared to his holiness.
Right.
And, of course, those sacrifices involve death of a substitute, which means it pointed to atonement. And that couldn't happen unless it was through a way that God initiated.
And I think,
Because we can talk about the ritual stuff being a temptation, etc., but the trust in the system or the trust that God said, hey, this is how it's done, is the thing that even for them was the... so God initiates this.
yeah.
Do I trust that this is going to be the thing that works to save me? And do I know if it's grace or not? That's other questions we can talk about, not necessarily related to this passage, but it's meant to point to the need for their having grace through a mediator that they cannot offer up. Like eventually it's like, apparently we've been, this, again, it's going to sound morose, but this is just how, I think it works. We've been killing thousands and thousands of these animals for how many years? And is that enough? I guess it's not, because I guess we have to keep going. And it did eventually fail. It did stop, which just points to even more of a need for, I guess that isn't the thing, is it? As it turns out, no, it's not. And God's version of the sacrifice, that's a once-for-all sacrifice, outdoes all of the sacrifices. So we read about this extremely complex, very involved. I mean, the Aaronic priesthood that you talked about, these were like this whole line of people who did nothing but focus on worship rituals.
Yeah.
All of this complexity and involved process is meant to, like everything else we've been looking at, point us to God's character and nature as holy, that he deserves that kind of dedication and more. And guess what? The dedication isn't going to be enough. Yeah.
So we might say then, sort of in wrapping up, that I imagine myself as a priest in this. I talked about that. But the New Testament tells me I am a priest and that we all are a chosen people, a royal priesthood because of Christ.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? That means that I'm not putting on the blood of these rams. I have the blood of Christ, which is enough, and that there's not a continual killing of an animal every single day, that the work of the perfect sacrifice of Jesus is enough such that I can do what? I can approach the holiness of God, which was demonstrated over all of these chapters. You and I, through Christ, approach him with boldness and with confidence. Mm-hmm. Because as all of these things, as great and as intricate as they were not enough, but Christ is. And so now as a priest, we don't have to go with bells attached around our garments, because we're not going to find ourselves messing that up, and because we're going to be covered by the work of Christ. And so we approach with confidence the throne of God. And the great blessing that is, at least as a New Testament Christian, it's easy to take that sort of thing for granted. And so when I read back through this and I remember all of what it took to even walk into the Holy of Holies, it helps me have a greater degree of adoration and worship and wonder at the work of Christ, and what that really does mean for me is the great gift of salvation in Jesus.
And what was true for them is true for us today. because God initiated it all then, and he's still initiating this work to draw near to him through Jesus.
Once you were not a people, but now you are.
Yes.
Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. Somebody pray for us.
God, we thank you that you are the one that does this work of us coming to you. It's not anything that we can do on our own, but because of what you've done in sending your Son. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you for what he's done for us. Help us to keep our eyes fixed on him, and may he be our motivation for all that we do. Thank you for building our church, and the church that's rooted and grounded in Jesus Christ. And we thank you for your love and pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.